Welcome to another episode of Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement. I'm here at the News Forum where all voices matter. It's time for our monthly discussion with Tom Caldwell, who is the chairman of Caldwell Securities Ltd in Toronto. And of course, there's lots of economic news to digest. Welcome back, Tom.
Thank you, Tony.
I guess the first thing since our last discussion, is the U.S. in a recession or is it not? I mean, there seems to be some controversy over that, I guess.
Well, they keep redefining it as well because politically it's unpalatable to be in a recession. So it might be a slowdown correction. We're not actually in a recession at this point in time. The economy is doing reasonably well. You're seeing retail sales being fairly buoyant, Walmart, etc. So really, we're not there yet. The trilogy is, oh my gosh, inflation, and then central banks are going to raise interest rates too much, and that's going to cause a recession. But that trilogy doesn't necessarily hold. Banks might not be dopey enough to shut the whole economy down. I think they're talking tougher than their actions will turn out to be.
I see. Okay. And we also had recently the latest inflation numbers for Canada. They seem to be down to 7.6% growth in inflation. Is that something to be concerned about still?
Well, inflation is going to be with us for quite a period of time, and there are lots of policies in place that have exacerbated inflation. The decline in numbers really were underpinned by a decline in energy prices, but energy prices have gone up because governments, and particularly in Canada, decided that we should go to alternative sources, and it's too early for that. We don't have the capacity for it. So what they did is shut down one source of energy or curtail it before the other one was ready. And if anybody took economics 101, if you cut supply and the demand stays the same, the price goes up.
Right.
And I guess people in Ottawa, they didn't have that at Carleton or whatever.
So yeah, I guess there's lots of reasons for that. That could be part of it for sure. I'm just going over the numbers to start our show. We will get to broader issues too, but Canadian job numbers seem to be their growth seems to be a fraction of the U.S. growth, which was quite large in the last segment that was released in terms of job growth in the U.S. Your thoughts on where Canada stands in job growth?
Well, overall in North America, more people are coming back into the job market, and so that's there are a lot of people that just not only were working from home, a lot of them left their jobs because there was a lot of assistance. But increasingly, people are now coming back into the workforce. Canada, I do have concerns about because we are devoid of any overall economic policy to compete in the world or a strong voice in the world in world trade discussions, particularly with the US. So I do have future concerns about Canada, but we will lag the United States. That's just a fact of life. We don't have the industry diversity that they have in America.
And are you starting to see indications of that in the Canadian numbers?
Well, indications that more people are coming back into the
No,
participation.
that we are lagging behind the Americans.
Well, I think it's more intuitive when you think about it. There's still industries that have not come fully on stream. We're still way behind in the energy sector. That's a monster industry in Canada. There are going to be pickups in other areas, agriculture, but that's not a big job generator, if you will.
Right.
So we're going to drag our heels when it comes to job creation, just because of the fact we're not going to have the same growth levels. Other countries are eating our lunch, and particularly America, because America is always latently protectionist. Remember that,
right.
And that hurts Canada.
And are you starting to see? I guess we had a little bit of a win in our auto sector, being part of the bill that passed Congress. So that's a positive sign, I suppose.
It is. We dodged that bullet somewhat, but it's not over yet. Although, if I could digress a tiny bit, we talk about inflation and government policies. I still don't quite understand how spending $3 billion of government spending is going to cut inflation. Again, somebody missed economics 101, because government spending, low interest rates, readily available credit, and flushing the system with cash by central banks is what created this inflation in the first place. Oh, yes, I know about Russia and Ukraine, But it had started long before that game got going.
Indeed. We're going to continue our discussion with Tom Caldwell. He is the chairman of Caldwell Securities. Right after the break, please stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here with Tom Caldwell, chairman of Caldwell Securities Ltd. Tom, I think I've harped on this in a previous episode, but once again, when I look at Canadian job growth, it seems to be predominantly in the public sector. 86.7% of new employment since the pandemic has been in the public sector. And that leaves a very small percentage in the private sector. Is this sustainable? What's your reaction to this?
Well, governments by definition seem to be sustainable.
Yeah.
I think that what we're seeing, though, is not necessarily a crowding out, but working for the government is a favorable thing to do. You have indexed pensions, you have long holidays, you have a degree of job security, and increasingly, governments are becoming larger and larger parts of our economy. And again, with say the COVID, you have a lot more people checking, testing, etc. And the spin-off government programs require things, but governments don't listen. You know from your own experience in government, governments don't roll back programs. Those people on board to do that program will just find another program, or we'll switch our maladies from or our concerns from COVID to monkeypox, and we'll keep the same staff to work on that, which of course is a different kettle of fish. So government jobs are a fact of life, and governments are getting bigger and bigger and bigger relative to the rest of the Canadian economy.
It seems like we're almost sleepwalking in this. I mean, you mentioned this just earlier in this broadcast about the lack of a plan. Is there a post-COVID plan from the Canadian government for this economy, I guess was the question.
I don't think so. The plan seems to be a rigid focus on climate change, which it's like a one-trick pony. And if there is any plan beyond that, it's throwing money at aggrieved groups who will be satisfied just with more financial gifts, if you will. We don't have anything beyond that. There's nothing else there. And so you can get by with absentee management in a large corporation or in a country for a period of time.
Right.
But sooner or later, we're in a tough world with tough competition, both countries and companies.
Are we starting to see more evidence of that? Obviously, last couple of weeks, the tensions around Taiwan and China, that's with all of the blockading going on, that's affected yet again part of the supply chain. Are these kinds of tensions some things that Canadians should be worried about?
Well, it's really in the dictator's handbook. If you're having trouble at home, you have to have an external enemy to galvanize public opinion that you will keep them safe as long as you keep them in power. And you have that. You have that in Russia. You have that, and certainly in China. And listen, we're not exempt from that as well. Oh, this external threat. If you just give us these additional powers, I'll keep you safe. We've seen that in Canada,
right,
big time, and in the United States, hence many of the protests that we've experienced. So I think that's a fact of life. The China-Taiwan thing is a little bit different from the Ukraine. If China did decide to do something, there's no way we can continue to reinforce or help China or help Taiwan. They're isolated. But I don't think much is going to happen. The premier of China is going for a third term, which is basically like a perennial appointment at that point in time.
Right.
I don't think he's going to do anything stupid prior to that. But remember, the Chinese populace is on side with a war with Taiwan.
Mm.
They've done their propaganda task quite successfully.
Right. And are you concerned? I mean, obviously that's a huge issue when it comes to human rights, when it comes to military conflict. I'm not belittling that, but there is an economic cost to all of this as well. Is that something that you're following as well?
Well, the interesting thing is, microchips, semiconductors, that's Taiwan country. They dominate that area, but their manufacturing plants are in India and in America, et cetera. If China were to invade, it would really make a hit in that area, but it would only be temporary, and those facilities would just be blown up anyway to not, and I don't think China really wants to do it because they get a lot of their microchips, etc., out of Taiwan. My suspicion is, and remember, my guess is as bad as anyone else when it comes to this, is it's more saber rattling than anything else
I
at
see.
this point in time. I don't think anybody's ready to have a big war over it right now.
And of course, we've got the recent CHIPS legislation that passed the U.S. Congress. So that's a long-term play, not a short-term. I grant you that, but at least it shows that legislators are understanding why the supply chain is very important. Before you comment on that, we're going to take another brief break. Stay with us. We'll be back after these messages. And we're back here at Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here with Tom Caldwell, chairman of Caldwell Securities Ltd. Tom, Canadian home prices, they're down 6% from the February peak. Is this a new phase, a temporary phenomenon? What are your thoughts on that?
The answer is I don't know. I do think real estate does move in a long cycle. A house in Warren Road, which is premium Forest Hill Street, in 1929 was sold at $250,000. You had the Depression, you had the war, and they never got back to that price level until the 60s. So that was a very, very long cycle. Canada has been the beneficiary of a tremendous wave of immigration. Canada is a destination, and Toronto is a destination within the destination, Vancouver, as well as, of course, Montreal. But in Toronto, you have an everything community. If you come from Sierra Leone, I'll bet you there's a large Sierra Leonese community in Toronto. So you can come to Canada, you can come to Toronto and still have part of your support mechanism in place. So this is a destination. We've had lots of immigrants coming in and lots of money coming in too, China, etc., bidding up home prices. But there's got to be a point where it does level off. There's got to be people like me who still live in their big old houses, and sooner or later they're going to move us to Happy Trails Manor or something like that, and you're going to sell your house to pay the rest of your bills. So there will be a demographic shift over time, but you're going to have bumps and wobbles. But remember, housing prices really shot up with very, very low interest rates. You could buy a reasonable home and not pay more than you would for a very good apartment just by buying the house. Now, those numbers are changing now because rental costs are now going up significantly. So I think you're going to see housing prices ease off to some degree, but they're not going back to ground zero where they were, say, 20 years, 10 years ago or 5 years ago.
Gotcha. Turning to another sector just for a second, love to get your point of view on this news item. Air Canada lost $386 million in the second quarter. Now, second quarter, some restrictions still in place and so on. But what does that mean going forward? We've seen the chaos with Air Canada and at the airports, but are they ready for a big bounce back, or is there big problems in the airline sector right now?
The airline business is a very, very challenging business. Somebody did a calculation 15 or 20 years ago, adding up all the profits and losses of all the airlines since airlines started. And it showed that there was no net gains
Oh
over
my
that
gosh.
period of time. The problem with the airline industry is you got this very, very expensive inventory of aircraft, and those planes have to be moving all the time. And they have to be in the air. You have to be flying them. You have to have decent load factors going on. And if you have some strike that goes on, a strike of say 2 or 3 weeks can ruin the whole profits for a year. So you have all these extraneous and new write-offs that are really big. And you have obviously the COVID, you have the restrictions of travel, you have the insanity at Pearson Airport. People are avoiding. I have to go to New York, but I'm just doing Zoom calls. I'm not getting on an airplane where I got to deal with this Arrive Canada idiocy. I'm not going through the lineups at the airport to go and come. I don't need that stuff. So I do think they're still suffering, but it's a tough business because you used to have militant unions, and if they go on strike, you're going to lose a whole year. And they got big write-offs in all of them. So I just think it's a tough business. I've made money on the airlines years ago in the takeover of CP, et cetera, but I've never come back and I've never regretted it.
Oh, that's very interesting. And of course, they're they're suffering from the same problems with retaining personnel and acquiring good personnel as well. So that makes it even tougher, right?
Absolutely. And fuel prices too. Don't
Right.
forget that.
Yeah. No.
They burn a lot of fuel, and particularly with our prime minister's travel.
That's right.
That's just a
You had to get
gratuitous
that one in.
shot.
You got that. You got that one in. That's pretty good. We got a minute before the next break, but travel sector generally, are you bullish about it?
Well, I was looking at Carnival today. I'm at the age where I like to go on cruises because my wife travels very heavy, and once I get that luggage into the room, I'm going for a trip, and I don't have to do anything further. So that it does make sense, but I think we're still dealing in a ripple effect for the
Mhm.
time being. There's lots of capacity in the travel industry, and of course, Uber or not Uber, but Airbnb has quintupled the number of rooms available in any city now. So it's a tougher business. It's not one that I'm involved in at the present.
Gotcha. We're going to continue our conversation with Tom Caldwell. He's the chairman of Caldwell Securities Ltd. Our monthly discussion on what's going on in the economy. We're going to take a brief break. We'll be back after that break. Please stay with us. Welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here with Tom Caldwell, chairman of Caldwell Securities Limited. Tom, going back to the energy sector, I know that's something you care a lot about, know a lot about. There was this announcement of a deal on hydrogen fuel production with Germany. I don't know whether you were following that or not, or whether you've got any thoughts on it.
I just looked at it superficially. I do not see that as a major factor at this point in time. You're talking a huge economy trying to switch gears. It may make something different, and it may make some difference in at the margins, but not any big thing. And hydrogen is something that everyone's played with for a long time. I do not believe that's a substitute for natural gas or even petroleum. It's clean burning, yet highly explosive. It's and more so than probably even propane. So I don't see that as a big game changing solution.
So what is going on? How can obviously it looks like there's going to be quite the fuel crunch in Germany, and I know reading the UK papers, it's a huge political issue about the rising cost of fuel, home fuel in the UK. What are your thoughts on that? Where can Canada play a role if it wants to?
Canada can't play a role. We're in the Mickey Mouse Club. We should have had LNG plants, as I've said before, on the East Coast and the West Coast to provide liquid natural gas. We've been talking about it for 25 years. We just can't get our ducks in a row because it's so political. The thing with this looming energy crisis in Europe is that there really is a motivation in Europe to push for a settlement in the Ukraine. And this is a tool that Putin is using quite effectively. Um, One of the great fears in the Ukraine is the Western support, despite all the rhetoric, will start to ease off when people start to get cold. And I think everybody in Europe would be very happy if some accommodation was reached there. I don't know whether it's possible, probably not. But if some accommodation could be, and they could go back to business as usual, because typically democracies are not prepared for this type of event. We've been so focused on climate and other alternatives, etc., things that sound nice but don't necessarily work. So now reality has come home, and the way to cope with that reality is, frankly, to maybe quietly walk away from support of the Ukraine, at least to the level of rhetoric. Just ease it off a bit and see whether they can be forced to accept accommodation as well. I think that's one of the unfortunate realities of this game.
And is that with a view to releasing the supplies from Russia again, or?
Yes.
But
Yeah.
it's kind of hard to ever trust Putin again after what he did in February, though, right?
Well, one is one and the other's the other. Territorial ambitions, that's the old, again, back to the dictator's handbook, let's reconstitute our great country, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But the collateral damage with what he gambled was, as they would do an embargo, they'd try to cut Russia off. And his gamble is they cannot do it.
Right.
They need us, and they're going to accommodate. And I think he might win that bet.
Interesting. Longer term prospects on the world economy. Are you bullish about things?
I'm always optimistic. You know, you look at America, it's a shambles politically. It's a soap opera when you look at the news with everybody saying we're going to those guys and these guys and everybody's a bad. You know, the beauty with free enterprise or free societies or democracy, they have the capability to renew themselves.
Right.
And I think that will happen in America and indeed in Canada as well, and maybe even Europe, but certainly within America. The unfortunate thing that might push the clock back on that was this idiocy of Mar-a-Lago and having search warrants. That's got Trump to the point that he's going to run again when he probably waffling a little bit, and it also strengthened his base. I would rather see more moderates both on the Democratic and Republican sides. You know, maybe a DeSantis out of Florida. But the point here is that if he comes back, he's a good shot at winning, and then we're going to have 4 more years of conflict after the election. We'd like to get beyond that stuff.
Well, our time is up for now, Tom, but these issues aren't going away, so we look forward to talking again next month. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Tony.
Thank you. Always an interesting discussion with Tom Caldwell, chairman of Caldwell Securities, about the economic picture, both in Canada and worldwide. A lot going on, and clearly we'll have him back next month, as we always do. Thanks for watching today.